Hello, this is James from Spirit Wolf Visions, and I'm going to talk about some of the things I've encountered while reading in tarot that just aren't necessarily true. I'm going to talk about like the four cards I feel like people have the biggest misconceptions of, and I'm going to talk about one of the things that people have a misconception of when it comes to tarot, which is what religious practice you must be in order to do this, which is silly. But anyway, for four cards that get misconstrued often, I'm probably covering it, but this is the Death card, as you can see, a little backwards, but that's okay. The Death card, when most people see this, they think it literally means they are gonna die, which isn't true. In my experience, I've never ever predicted or had a reading that said somebody is going to die. Maybe other readers have that experience. I just don't. Hello, viewer. So the Death card is one of those cards that I feel like a lot of people just don't. Hi, Melissa. Just don't understand unless they read tarot. So majority people will say, "Oh, somebody's gonna die." No, not necessarily. Death is a transition card, not necessarily an actual death. So that's the one card out of the four. The number one I feel like is the most misunderstood. Number two, the Devil. Okay. I'm smiling because the Devil has some really strong religious connections, especially with Christianity, but it doesn't literally mean the actual devil. No, it doesn't, but a lot of people think it does, or they want to demonize somebody in their life, which is not necessarily the case either. So, for me, the devil represents material possessions and this obsession, or greed, or extremes also can represent like mental health or substance abuse, that sort of thing, but the devil doesn't necessarily actually represent the actual devil. So that's number two. I feel like it's misconstrued often. Number three is the Fool. Okay. So a lot of people feel like this is saying that they are foolish or they aren't necessarily wise, which isn't what the Fool means. The Fool is literally kind of does have that innocence quality, but I usually read this as the person that wants to do what they want to do and doesn't necessarily care about what other people are doing. So the Fool, I feel like, is one of those cards that a lot of people just don't understand. Number four, the Tower. Now, I just dropped it, so hold on. The Tower is one of those cards I feel like a lot of times gets misconstrued by people who have like a glimmer of knowledge of tarot, and they understand this card to mean bad, which it can be bad, but what people don't realize is even in the chaos, you can have that glimmer of hope. So the Tower isn't totally, completely horrible. It has that glimmer of hope of knowing that you can rebuild your tower, whatever it is, or whatever's falling apart. You can rebuild it, and you'll know which way to go from the lessons you've learned when it fell apart. So those are like the four cards I feel like a lot of people just don't understand or read into or think something differently of them. And I just kind of wanted to just burst that bubble a little bit and say, no, don't get into this thought process of this card has to be this just because of the name on it. That's not always the case. So another misconception that I want to dispel is that I've literally had people ask me if I was a practicing pagan just because I read tarot. Now, just because somebody practices a specific religious belief doesn't mean they have to be practicing tarot or vice versa. Tarot is something that anyone can do of any faith anywhere, and it doesn't matter what your beliefs are necessarily for you to do tarot. And this includes Christianity. I might upset people, but even in the Christian faith, there was a time when the Christians would use tarot and look to tarot for guidance. So tarot's always been kind of around long enough to have touched almost everywhere. So you don't have to be a specific faith to practice divination of any sort, including tarot. I'm picking on tarot a little bit because that's the thing most people know the most, and I feel like that's the one that people have the most exposure to. Okay. So one more thing I want to kind of talk about is this perception of tarot being able to predict the future of any sort, including death. Now, from my point of view, tarot can provide guidance to a possibility. It doesn't necessarily predict exactly what's going to happen necessarily. Sometimes it just points out the most likely scenario to occur from this point forward. Now, to me, I would say you have the choices to alter that outcome 100%. I want to backtrack a little bit because I wanted to talk about one thing specifically, which is witchcraft and divination. Because I kind of talked about this a little bit with my interview in Tribe Finder, and I forgot to say something, and I really want to say it now. There's a fine line between something like witchcraft or Wicca and divination. Like, they can go hand in hand. They can, but they don't have to. And I don't want people to have this understanding that just because I'm a practicing witch and I teach a witchcraft class, that must mean that divination is part of that. It's not necessarily, and I don't plan to teach divination as part of that per se. That's something that is up to the individual to decide whether or not they want to pick up something like tarot and practice it. And I just wanted to make sure to talk about that because I feel like that fine line, people get kind of cross it really easily, and they don't understand that the two don't necessarily go hand in hand. That's why I'm saying, like, any religion can practice tarot. You don't have to be a pagan or a witch or whatever. You don't have to be anything to practice tarot. So those are some of the misconceptions that I wanted to talk about today a little bit and kind of just dispel those misconceptions a little bit because, granted, this is just me speaking in my frame of reference and my point of view, but I think on a whole, a lot of people understand these things as far as like tarot cards being subjective to the reader's point of view, but specifically not talking about, like, example, death doesn't mean somebody's going to die, for example. That's not what most readers I've encountered would say. So that's really it. I didn't really have a lot to talk about. There were just some bullet points in my head that I wanted to kind of say, let's talk about these. So moving forward, just keep in mind that I am still at Prismscape on the weekends. I'm available from 9 in the morning to 1 o'clock in the afternoon, both Saturday and Sunday. You can look me up on the website now. I am on the website. You can book me through there, or you can book me through my web page, which is www.spiritwolfvisions.com, and you can also see all my services there as far as what I could provide for you and what those specific services would do in those instances. Otherwise, have a blessed day, and I hope that this was at least a little bit informative.